France lost another court case against Jehovah's Witnesses just a few months ago. Their anti-cult agency was ordered to delete defamatory statements and pay damages for the second time in about a year. Meanwhile, Norway's appeal court completely reversed a lower court decision, and Belgium's highest court definitively ruled that shunning is perfectly legal. Yet every XJW knows the devastating reality of what actually happens when you leave. Now, I'm going to explain exactly why Watchtower keeps winning these cases and why that pattern may finally be starting to change. You ready? Let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are deep diving into something that's been frustrating the XJW community for years. Why Watchtower keeps winning in court cases despite the fact that we all know the truth about what they do. We're going to look at what's happening right now in France, what went down in Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and other countries, and most importantly, we're going to understand why courts keep ruling in Watchtower's favor, even when the evidence seems so clear to us. Now, before anyone thinks this is just going to be me ranting, though of course there will be some of that, I want to be clear here. I'm going to explain the legitimate legal principles that courts are trying to protect. Because here's the thing, the courts aren't stupid. And they're not necessarily being fooled in the way we might think, though I'll get into that too. They're dealing with a genuinely difficult balance between protecting religious freedom and protecting individuals from harm. The problem is that Watchtower has built a system so sophisticated that it operates in the gap between those two concerns, hiding its real culture behind a wall of official rules. But there's also good news here. The scrutiny is intensifying. More countries are investigating. More courts are hearing testimony. And even when Watchtower does win, they're being forced to expose their practices in ways they never have before. So stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand not just what's happening, but why, and why there's actually reason for real hope. You ready? Here we go. Let's start with the situation in France, because MIVILUDES, I think that's how you say it, their anti-cult agency, keeps losing these court cases. Now, I'm going to refer to them as the French anti-cult agency because that name, MIVILUDES, is difficult for me to pronounce, and I'm sure I'm getting it wrong. If you want to look up the agency, the spelling of that name is MIVILUDES. It's short for Interministerial Mission for Monitoring and Combating Cultic Deviances. Now, that's a mouthful. Basically, it's their anti-cult organization funded by the government. Now, the French anti-cult agency has been going hard after Jehovah's Witnesses for years, publishing reports calling out their practices. Sounds great, right? Finally, someone with government backing in France taking on the Watchtower. Except there's a problem. They keep losing in court. On June 14th of 2024, the Paris administration court ruled that the agency made factually incorrect statements about Jehovah's Witnesses. According to reporting from bitterwinter.org, the court found that it was wrong for the agency to claim that Jehovah's Witnesses don't report child sexual abuse to authorities, or that they discourage children from getting an education. The court ordered passages to be deleted, and here's the kicker, the French anti-cult agency had to pay damages to the Watchtower. Then it happened again. On July 11, 2025, the same court found that 11 passages in the agency's 2021 annual report were defamatory and was again ordered to delete them. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, which oversees the agency, was ordered to pay damages this time also. Now, I can hear some of you already, but we know they discourage education. We know they handle abuse cases poorly. And you're right, we do know that. We've lived it. Even the Watchtower has now come out saying it's okay to go to college or university. That wasn't the case when the trial was ongoing. And how convenient that they dropped their anti-education language not long after this defamation trial. But here's what the court found. The French anti-cult agency was basing their claims on testimony from former members, what the court called apostate ex-members, without comparing it to statements from current members or the organization's official documents and policies. So the court specifically noted, according to Winter's coverage, that Jehovah's Witnesses provided documentation showing they do instruct elders to report abuse to authorities in France. They provided, quote, an extract from the France-specific supplement to their guide, also dated 2019, which explicitly recalls the obligation to report any abuse of minors and asks elders to contact the organization's legal department immediately for receiving advice to ensure compliance with French law on reporting child abuse, end quote. Now, those of us who've been in the organization know there's a huge gap between what's written and what actually happens. We know about the two-witness rule. We know about the pressure not to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. But in a court of law, if the official policy says report to authorities and you're claiming they don't do that, you better have rock-solid evidence of a systematic pattern of non-reporting. Testimonies from people who left years ago, presented without context or comparison to current policy, just isn't enough for the court to rule against Watchtower. And here's the really important part. The court noted that the agency was basically just repeating allegations, but not actually checking them against the actual documentation from the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses. They're saying that's bad methodology, even if the underlying concerns are valid. Now let's talk about Norway, because this one had the EXJW community on the edge of our seats for years. This was the big one. Norway actually did revoke Jehovah's Witness legal registration and cut off their state funding in 2022. The reason? Their shunning practices, particularly as they affect children. In January 2024, the Oslo District Court held a trial. Former Jehovah's Witnesses testified about being baptized young and then shunned by their families when they decided to leave as adults. According to coverage from AvoidJW.org, the testimonies were powerful and heartbreaking. People talked about losing their entire social network, their families, everything. The court saw the 2016 convention video, you know the one.
Mom and Dad saw that they needed to be loyal, just like Aaron. They loved me and wanted me to come back to Jehovah. I tried to contact them. I just wanted to talk and to hear their voice. I missed being with my family. And they thought about reaching out to me. But they knew that if they had associated with me, even a little, just to check on me, that small dose of association might have satisfied me. It could have made me think that there was no need to return to Jehovah.
On March 4th, 2024, the Oslo District Court ruled against Jehovah's Witnesses. They said the shunning practices violated members' freedom to leave the organization and constituted psychological violence against children. Watchtower lost their registration and their state funding. The EXJW community celebrated. Finally, someone got it. But then came the appeal. On March 14, 2025, the Court of Appeal completely reversed the decision. According to Winter's reporting, the appeals court ruled that, quote, Jehovah's Witnesses had been fully vindicated and that the decisions to deny grants and registration are invalid, end quote. They awarded Watchtower 8.5 million Norwegian kroner, about $800,000, in legal costs. Let me tell you, that hurt. That really hurt to see, because we know what shunning does. We've lived it. We've watched families destroyed by it. We've seen people commit suicide because they lost everyone they ever loved to this vile practice. So how did Watchtower win? Well, here's what the appeals court said, and I'm quoting from Bitter Winter's coverage here. The court found that, quote, limiting contact with an unrepentant wrongdoer who has been removed from the congregation is not a violation of his rights, end quote. In cases involving minors who were disfellowshipped, now called being removed, the court said it, quote, does not constitute psychological violence, end quote. The court noted that family ties aren't actually broken, and this is key, because, quote, baptized members will still be able to have normal day-to-day contact with withdrawn or excluded members who live in the same household, end quote. They also noted that there are exceptions for necessary family matters, like when excluded parents become ill and need care. The court also pointed out that, quote, the social consequences of opting out, which can undoubtedly be very difficult for many, are set out in the Jehovah's Witness rules and are something that the members are familiar with, end quote. In other words, you knew what you were signing up for. Now, we know that's not really true, but I'll talk more about that later. But here's where it gets really frustrating. Jan Nielsen, a former Jehovah's Witness who testified in the case, posted on social media about what it was like in that courtroom. According to AvoidJW's coverage, Jan said, quote, I have been surprised over and over again during these 4 years of procedure in courts. Kind of hard to rate them up against each other, but I must say what never stops to surprise me is the way the Jehovah's Witnesses sit next to me in court, listening to their lawyer deny basic stuff from JW life, like the elder's authority, that there are no rules and regulations and everyone is free to decide what to do, end quote. He gave a specific example, quote, one example is when they showed the 2017 shunning video in court for all to see. Then a Jehovah's Witness testified and claimed that the video was never meant as any kind of instruction, advice, or any learning from the common JW from Watchtower. It was just a random example showing how some families would choose to handle things. Surreal, end quote. Let that sink in. They played the actual video showing exactly what Watchtower teaches about shunning, and then a witness testified that it wasn't actually instruction, just a random example. And apparently the court bought it, or at least didn't find it compelling enough to rule against them. But wait, there's more. The Norwegian government has now appealed to the Supreme Court. According to AvoidJW's August 2025 coverage, Norway's Supreme Court accepted the appeal. So this ain't over yet. It's going to be round 4 between Watchtower and the Norwegian government, and it's going to set precedent not just for Norway, but potentially for other European countries watching closely. Now let's look at Belgium, because their case is instructive. It shows the full arc of how these cases typically go. In March of 2021, the Criminal Court of Ghent convicted Jehovah's Witnesses and fined them 96,000 euros for their shunning practices. The court said it amounted to, quote, discrimination and incitement to hatred, end quote. The EXJW community rightfully celebrated. Finally, a court that understood. Finally, someone holding them accountable. But on June 7th of 2022, the Court of Appeal of Ghent completely overturned that decision. According to Human Rights Without Frontiers reporting, the appeals court found that Jehovah's Witnesses, quote, biblical practice of limiting or avoiding contact with former followers, also called shunning, was legal and does not incite discrimination, segregation, hatred, or violence, end quote. The appeals court made a crucial distinction. They characterized what Jehovah's Witnesses do as passive social avoidance, which is protected, as opposed to cases where ex-members are stalked, harassed, bullied, or threatened, which would not be protected. Then on December 19th of 2023, Belgium's Court of Cassation, their highest court, made it final. According to Bitter Winter's coverage, the court ruled that, quote, the teachings on shunning consist of guidelines relating to ordinary social intercourse, which strongly discourage contacts with members who have been disfellowshipped or have publicly disassociated themselves from the organization. The guidelines label them as sinful, without, however, inciting manifestly unlawful conduct, including stalking, threats, or harassment. End quote. The court also noted something important. While shunning may lead to social isolation towards other members of the faith community, this is not generalized social isolation. Jehovah's Witnesses are a tiny percentage of Belgium's population, about 26,000 people in a country of over 11 million. So the court reasoned shunned individuals remain free to associate with everybody else, most of society. Again, we in the EXJW community know that's not how it feels when you lose your entire family, your entire social network, everything you've ever known. But from a legal standpoint, the court is saying you still have access to the other 99.9% of society, and that's just the breaks. The Netherlands situation is interesting because they actually studied the issue thoroughly before deciding what to do. According to Bitter Winter's January 2024 reporting, the Dutch government commissioned the Open University to produce a comprehensive report on social exclusion from religious groups. Now, this study looked at practices in multiple countries. That included Belgium, the UK, France, Norway, and Switzerland. And here's what they found. Quote, the autonomous existence of religious communities is indispensable for pluralism in a democratic society and is a core element of freedom of religion or belief. The state should respect the right to autonomy of religious communities. End quote. On December 14, 2023, the Dutch Minister of Justice and Security wrote to Parliament explaining why shunning should not be criminalized. According to the Human Rights Without Frontiers coverage, the minister said this, quote, social exclusion is a common social phenomenon. It manifests itself in different facets of social life, usually takes shape in stages, and can also occur in religious communities, end quote. He continued, quote, from a fundamental law perspective, a religious community has both collective religious freedom and associational freedom. Without a legal basis, the government is not allowed to interfere in the functioning of a religious community, end quote. The report also acknowledged something important. Shunning creates problems and suffering not only for those who are shunned, but also for those who feel religiously compelled to shun them. And that's something that we probably don't talk about enough, the psychological toll on active witnesses who have to shun their own children or their parents or their siblings. As of early 2025, the Czech Ministry of Culture is considering revoking Jehovah's Witnesses registration. Now, according to Brno Daily's February 2025 reporting, the ministry has accused the organization of 5 offenses, mainly concerning damage to social ties and preventing minors from receiving appropriate medical care. But here's what's interesting about it. According to Balkan Insight's April 2025 coverage, a Czech researcher named Jakub Jal predicted that, quote, the ministry is going to back down. I don't think there's going to be any deregistration in the end, quote. Why? Because such a move would be seen as, quote, autocratic non-Western, quote, and the argument for religious freedom will likely trump other concerns. He noted that this is especially sensitive because Jehovah's Witnesses were banned and persecuted during the communist era. Taking action against them now in a democratic Czech Republic would look really bad. All right, so let's get to the heart of it. Why does Watchtower keep winning these cases? Well, there are several reasons, and they're all interconnected. First, religious autonomy is a fundamental right. Courts in democratic countries take religious freedom very seriously. They have to. Religious freedom is one of the bedrock principles of liberal democracy. The whole point is that the government doesn't get to tell religious organizations how to interpret scripture or how to organize themselves. According to the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment principles, as outlined in various Supreme Court decisions, religious organizations have the right to determine their own membership, their own rules, and their own interpretations of religious texts. This isn't just about Jehovah's Witnesses. It's about protecting all religious minorities from government overreach. That's how the courts are approaching this most of the time. Think about it. If the government can tell Jehovah's Witnesses they're not allowed to shun, what's to stop them from telling Muslims, for instance, that they can't require modest dress, or telling Catholics that they have to ordain women? Once you open that door, where does it stop? It's a very slippery slope. Second, freedom of association works both ways. Courts recognize that freedom of association includes the right not to associate with certain people. If I start a book club and one member keeps disrupting meetings, I have the right to kick him out. If I run a political organization and someone publicly opposes our core mission, I can remove them from membership. All of that is legal. Religious organizations are seen as voluntary associations. You chose to join. You agree to the rules, and the organization has the right to remove members who violate those rules. Courts are very reluctant to interfere with this because it would fundamentally undermine the concept of freedom of association. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I think it too. That's not how this really works. And I'll get to that. I'm just summarizing what the courts have said to date. Third, there's what I call the "you knew what you were signing up for" argument. This one is painful, but courts repeatedly emphasize it. The consequences of leaving are known in advance. According to the Norway Appeals Court reasoning, as reported by Winter, quote, "The social consequences of opting out, which can undoubtedly be very difficult for many, are set out in the Jehovah's Witness rules and are something that the members are familiar with, both those who opt out and the remaining members. It is thus not a new and unknown sanction that is implemented," end quote. In other words, you weren't deceived. The organization doesn't hide what happens if you leave. You knew this going in, and them's are the breaks. Now, don't throw your phone or punch your computer screen. I know you want to at this point, because those of us who are born in know that's not really how it works. When you're baptized at 12 or 14, you don't truly understand what you're agreeing to. You can't comprehend what it means to lose your entire family. But from a legal standpoint, that information was available to you. Fourth, courts recognize that exit costs are normal in all organizations. Leaving any organization comes with costs. If you quit a demanding but well-paying job, you lose the income. If you leave a political party, your former associates might no longer hang out with you. If you divorce your spouse, they might refuse to speak to you in the future. According to Winter's coverage of the Norway case, one scholar noted this, quote, "All human organizations have what sociologists call exit costs," end quote. Shunning is just one type of exit cost. And unless there's active harassment, threats, or violence, as opposed to just ceasing association, courts have been really reluctant to interfere. Fifth, courts focus on the fact that cohabiting family members aren't shunned. This is a big one for the courts, so pay attention. Watchtower's official policy is that family members living in the same household continue to have normal day-to-day contact, even if one has been disfellowshipped or removed. According to multiple court decisions, this means family ties aren't actually broken, though your screen might be at this point in the video. But again, I'm going to get into that more in a minute. The Norway Appeals Court specifically noted per Winter, quote, baptized members will still be able to have normal day-to-day contact with withdrawn or excluded members who live in the same household, end quote, and, quote, baptized members will be able to have contact with excluded or withdrawn family members with whom they do not live in connection with necessary family matters, end quote. So courts see this and they think, okay, so families can still interact, just not in religious contexts. That seems like a reasonable boundary. Of course, we know the reality is very different from that. We know about the emotional coldness, the conditional love, the way even household members can be frozen out, and how it's not at all uncommon for disfellowship to remove children to be ejected from the house the day they turn 18. Plenty of stories around regarding that. The most famous one probably being Owen Morgan, who's a big EXJW YouTuber. But that's hard to prove in court, especially when Watchtower can point to their written policies saying that's not their official instruction. And sixth, there's the distinction between passive avoidance versus active harassment. And this distinction is crucial. The Belgian Court of Cassation made it explicit. According to Winter, Watchtower's practices amount to, quote, passive social avoidance, end quote, not active harassment. They're not telling members to stalk, threaten, or harm ex-members. They're just telling members not to associate with them. And here's the thing. You and I both have the right to decide not to associate with someone. If my neighbor says something offensive and I decide never to speak to them again, that's my right. I'm not harassing them. I'm just exercising my freedom to choose my own associations. Courts see Watchtower's shunning through that lens. It's about members exercising their individual freedom to choose not to associate with certain people, and that's not something that they're going to curtail. Now, here's where it gets really important, because this is where we need to talk about the gap between policy and practice. This is where Watchtower sophistication comes in. There is a massive gap between what the official policy says and what actually happens in congregations. And Watchtower has built this system in a way that gives them plausible deniability to the courts. Let me show you what I mean with the actual text from the September 2024 Elders Manual, Shepherd the Flock of God, regarding associating with disfellowship people. It says, quote, there is a difference between simply greeting a person who has been removed from the congregation or who has disassociated himself and socializing with him. A committee should be formed if, despite repeated counsel, an individual willfully and continually engages in unnecessary association with a non-relative who has been removed from the congregation or who has disassociated himself, end quote. Notice that word, unnecessary. Well, what counts as unnecessary? Who decides? The elders do. Where do they get their guidelines on that decision? From the Watchtower. The vagueness in the wording is by design. Shepherd the Flock of God book continues, quote, a committee should be formed if, despite repeated counsel, an individual persists in associating with a relative who is promoting apostate teachings or wrong conduct, end quote. So with non-relatives, any unnecessary association can get you in trouble. With relatives, it's only if they're promoting apostate teachings or wrong conduct. But again, who decides what counts as promoting or what counts as apostate teaching or wrong conduct? The elders. And where do they get their guidelines from? The Watchtower. And here's the really damning part from section 17 of the manual regarding elders and ministerial servants. Quote, the body of elders should evaluate whether the brother's attitude and actions show respect for the admonition found in 1 Corinthians 5:11, end quote. This is specifically about appointed men, elders and ministerial servants, who allow a disfellowshipped adult family member to live in their home. The manual says that the elders should evaluate whether this brother still qualifies for his position. So technically, you won't be disfellowshipped for letting your adult disfellowshipped son live with you. But if you're an elder or ministerial servant, you'll be evaluated and will likely lose your position. Everyone will know. Everyone will understand why. This is the genius of Watchtower's system. They can truthfully tell courts, we don't disfellowship people for associating with family members, while creating a culture, a system where almost no one dares to do it because of the social consequences we all know will follow if you do. According to testimony from the Norway trial, as reported by AvoidJW.org, one former elder stated this, quote, in reality, any Jehovah's Witness who refuses to enforce shunning risks being disfellowshipped themselves. It is not a suggestion, it is an enforced rule, end quote. And every witness knows, whether it's written explicitly or not, that total isolation is what's expected. That's the lived reality in the congregations worldwide. That's the culture. But here's what's really troubling. According to AvoidJW's coverage of the Norway trial, Watchtower's lawyer, quote, does not want the organization's material, Watchtower, Awake, Elders Manual, videos, etc., to be used in the trial, end quote, because of their interpretations. Think about that. They don't want their own publications used as evidence of what they actually teach. Why? Because those publications tell the real story. And it gets worse. According to testimony reported by AvoidJW, a former elder exposed that, quote, members of the organization are conditioned to withhold or distort the truth, even in court, if it serves to protect the religious community, end quote. In fact, the Watchtower itself has taught this principle many times. The November 15, 2004 Watchtower stated, quote, however, this does not mean that he is under obligation to give full information to those who may want to bring harm to Jehovah's people in some way, end quote. That's not an isolated quote either. Starting in the 1950s, the Watchtower has made a number of similar statements about what it called theocratic warfare. JWFacts.com is a great resource if you want to read all their published statements in this regard. So let me explain why this matters and what courts aren't seeing. What we're dealing with here is a sophisticated coercive control system. Watchtower has built a system that operates through social pressure rather than explicit rules, through implication rather than direct commands, through culture rather than written policy, and through informal sanctions rather than formal penalties. You won't officially be disfellowshipped or removed for not shunning a family member, but you will lose congregation privileges. You will be counseled repeatedly by elders. You will be viewed as not exemplary. If you're appointed, you'll likely lose your position. You almost certainly face social ostracism from others who see you as spiritually weak. The end result? You'll be soft shunned, avoided as if you've been removed, even if you haven't officially. This creates what we might call enforced voluntary compliance. You're technically free to choose, but the social cost of the wrong choice is so high that almost nobody makes it. And courts struggle with this because it's not written down explicitly as a rule. It doesn't trigger formal judicial action. It operates through social mechanisms that are hard to legislate against, and it gives Watchtower plausible deniability. When Watchtower representatives sit in court and say it's a personal choice and we don't enforce shunning, they're technically telling the truth about the written policy while completely misrepresenting the lived reality and culture of the religion. Now, let me show you what Watchtower's strategic response to all this legal pressure, because it's really a telling story. According to AvoidJW's October 2024 reporting, Watchtower quietly removed their shunning videos from the website after facing legal scrutiny. These were the videos showing exactly how to shun family members, like the Sonia video from the 2016 convention and others. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. And when these videos were shown in court, according to AvoidJW's coverage, Watchtower's defense, quote, seemed visibly irritated and exclaimed that this video had been removed from the organization's site and was no longer relevant, end quote. But the Norwegian state prosecutor had a brilliant response, quote, if Watchtower knew the video was wrong, how could they, at the same time, make a lawsuit against the Norwegian state for using the video as evidence? End quote. Exactly. If the video accurately represented your teachings when you made it, and you're suing the government for defamation based on citing that video, how can you now claim it was never meant as actual instruction? This is what we call having your cake and eating it too, or in legal terms, you can't have it both ways. Okay, I know this has been a lot, and if you're an EXJW watching this, you might be feeling pretty discouraged right now. Court after court ruling in Watchtower's favor, defamation cases won, appeals successful. It can feel like nothing's going to change. But here's why I actually think things are moving in the right direction, even if it's a lot slower than we'd like it to be. First, the scrutiny is intensifying. More countries are investigating than ever before. We've got Norway now heading to Supreme Court, France with ongoing investigation despite losses, the Czech Republic currently reviewing the situation, Denmark with government officials expressing concerns, and Japan, where legal teams are forming specifically to address Jehovah's Witness issues. And on top of that, a few months ago, an EXJW UK Parliament member spoke out while in his official capacity against the witnesses' practice of shunning. These are all good things. Momentum is building. According to AvoidJW's reporting, there are at least 15 to 20 countries where Jehovah's Witnesses practices have been legally contested or publicly discussed, particularly regarding shunning and the blood transfusion refusal policy. Second, Watchtowers being forced to expose their practices in the open. Every court case means more testimony, more documents, more videos being shown, more questions being asked. Even when Watchtower wins, they're still having to answer questions they've never had to answer publicly before. The Norway trial in particular got extensive media coverage. Newspapers like Vartland covered it daily. The public is learning what actually happens inside the, in the past, hidden realm of this organization. Third, policy changes show they're feeling the pressure. After the initial court loss in 2024, according to AvoidJW's reporting, Watchtower quickly changed their policies regarding judicial committees for minors. Now, only 2 elders meet with minors and their parents, rather than a full committee without the parents. There's supposed to be more patience, and cooperation with parents is supposed to increase. These changes came with unusual haste, according to coverage from CNE News, right after the court decision. According to that coverage, one German Jehovah's Witness lawyer said, quote, it's difficult not to see the connection with the Oslo court decision, end quote. When an organization that claims to be directed by God suddenly starts making rapid policy changes right after losing in court, that tells you something. Fourth, the gap between policy and reality is getting documented. Thanks to people like Jan Nielsen and others who testified, thanks to leaked elders manuals, thanks to removed videos being preserved and shared, the evidence of what really happens is accumulating. Courts move slowly, but they do move, and each case builds a foundation for the next one. And fifth, international precedents are being set. When Norway's Supreme Court eventually rules, and it will, that decision will influence courts in other countries. When France keeps taking action despite losses, it signals to other governments that they're not alone in their concerns. The pattern we're seeing is this: initial court victories for governments, then reversals on appeal based on religious freedom grounds, then possibly a third wave of more sophisticated legal approaches that account for the gap between policy and practice. So what does all of this mean for us? Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Watchtower has a really good legal team, and they built a sophisticated obfuscation system that's very difficult to challenge within the framework of religious freedom protections that democratic societies rightly maintain. They understand how to present their practices in court. They know which documents to emphasize and which ones to downplay. They know how to frame things as personal choice, even when the social reality is anything but. But understanding why they win doesn't mean accepting that they should win. It means we need to be smarter about how we advocate for change. We need to document the gap between policy and practice. We need to support testimony from people who can articulate the coercive mechanisms. We need to help courts understand the sophistication of the social control of the organization. We need to make the connection between voluntary and voluntold. We need to show how the informal enforcement system really works. And we need to be patient. Legal change is slow. Cultural change is slow, but it is happening. Every person who tells her story matters. Every leaked document matters. Every court case that forces Watchtower to answer uncomfortable questions really, really matters. All right, let me wrap this up with some final thoughts. The reason Watchtower keeps winning isn't because courts are stupid or because judges don't care about the harm being done. It's because there are genuine, important principles at stake here regarding religious freedom and freedom of association, and they're trying to get it right. It's important that they get it right. Courts are trying to protect those principles while also protecting individuals. It's a real balancing act, and there aren't easy answers. But the Watchtower is exploiting those principles. They've built a system with plausible deniability baked in. They can say it's voluntary while creating conditions where it's anything but. They can say families aren't broken while knowing full well that emotional bonds are severed even if people live in the same house. The challenge for all of us, for governments, for courts, for advocates, is to find ways to address that sophistication, that coercion, without undermining the legitimate protections that religious minorities need. I believe we'll get there. It's going to take time. It's going to take more testimony. It's going to take more leaked documents and more public awareness and more pressure. But we are not alone in this. There are thousands of us who've left, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, especially if you count those still physically in but mentally out of the organization, which we call PMOs. Many of us are telling our stories. We're supporting each other. We're making sure that the world knows what really happens behind the facade of Bible-based Christianity. So yeah, Watchtower won in Norway's appeal court. They did. They won in Belgium. They won against the anti-cult agency of France. They'll probably win some more, but they're also losing registrations, even if temporarily, losing public support, losing the ability to hide what they do. And every time they have to stand up in court and claim that their shunning videos weren't really instructions, every time they have to say members are free to choose, well, everyone who's ever been a member knows that's a lie. Every time they have to make rapid policy changes right after a court loss while claiming God directed them, they lose a little bit more credibility. The arc of justice is long, but it bends toward truth. It just takes time. So keep telling your stories. Keep supporting each other. Keep pushing for awareness and accountability. The scrutiny is intensifying. The evidence is mounting. The world is watching. And Watchtower's house of cards will eventually come crashing down. Thanks for watching, everybody. If this was helpful, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening with these court cases. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more in-depth analysis like this, and check out my past videos on the channel. And remember, You're not alone. We're all in this together. I'll catch you in the next video. Also, if you're still a Christian, check out my faith-based channel linked to in the video description. And if you're still a Christian, check this out. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about my book, The Broken Mirror, Rediscovering Our True Nature in Christ. Readers call it a fantastic book where you will feel yourself discovering your identity in Christ. One reviewer praised it as 5-star material for the spiritual mystic or group Bible study. It's time to escape legalism and shame. Discover you're already God's beloved child with divine nature flowing through you. With what reviewers describe as excellent writing style and elegant prose, like a campfire discussion with a knowledgeable and gifted raconteur, journey from Genesis to Revelation, uncovering your true identity. This book shows how to access God's peace, wisdom, and strength from within. Your struggles become opportunities for divine light to shine through. Available in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. The link to the book is in the video description. May God bless your journey along His path for you.